Good day, children. I'm teacher Sulan Brodricks. I hope all of you are fine and keeping in good health by the grace of God. Today, we will be doing chapter 4 of political science titled Social and Political Movements. Now, in the previous lessons, we have seen that political parties compete for political power, and when they win elections, their aim is to resolve the problems of the common man who has voted for them and is elected them to power. In order to resolve the issues of the common person, political parties have a program which includes all sections of the society, whether they are farmers, laborers, businessmen, women, youth, children, senior citizens, anybody. Now, if political parties are supposed to work for the redressal of various issues faced by different sections of the society, then why do people have to organize themselves and launch various movements? The reason for this is that everyone in society cannot be a part of political parties or the government and work or contribute to social welfare. So there are some people who have an in-depth knowledge about a particular issue or a problem. Those people focus on that issue and they try to resolve that issue. Now, how do those people go about doing this? Firstly, they organize people, they get them to come together. They build public opinion by creating awareness about that issue. They constantly follow up on that issue and see what is being done to solve that issue. And they pressurize political parties and the government to take definite steps to solve that social problem. They force the government to discuss about that issue in the parliament sessions that take place and make laws and frame policies that would put an end to that problem that society is facing. So, these are called movements that these people organize. Movements are very, very important in a democratic system because through movements, people's participation in public life is ensured and increased. Different social problems come under discussion because of these movements that are launched now and then. These movements force the government to pay attention to social problems that are taking place. Leaders and activists of these movements provide necessary information about these issues and problems to the government. This information is useful for the government when it is making policies and it is making laws to solve these issues. Now, there are some movements that aim at opposing a particular decision or policy of the government. In order to do that, the people who organize these movements use the right to protest. Now, though this right to protest is very, very helpful in opposing the government from putting forth a particular policy or making a particular law, this right to protest needs to be used in a very responsible manner. It should be used for the betterment of society and not for personal gain. Now, there were a lot of movements in the pre-independence era and in even the post-independence era. But after 1980, the movements that came into being or those that were organized, those movements were called neo-social movements. Neo meaning new. They were called neo-social movements because the nature of these movements was very, very different from the earlier movements. These new social movements that were organized were dealing with new issues and new problems that society was facing. Now, what is a movement? A movement is a mass organized activity. or a collective attempt made by people to bring about a change or sometimes to even stop any change from taking place. People actively participate in the process of social change. Instead of remaining mere passive participants, they now take part in those issues that are supposed to change, and they themselves initiate the change to resolve their problems. Although movements are devoted to one particular issue, especially after 1980s, they have an ideology behind them, a principle or a value behind which this movement has been launched. For example, movements that are launched against child marriage and dowry believe or follow the ideologies and principles of democracy, equality, and women's empowerment. Some of these movements slowly get transformed into political parties. Like in the pre independence era, you had many of these national leaders who organized themselves to protest against the Britishers. Slowly, their organizations got transformed into political parties. Now, any movement has these special characteristics or features. Any movement needs people's active participation and public support. A movement can be formed only when people are interested in resolving a particular issue. Like, only if people are interested in resolving the issue of pollution can they launch a movement to curb pollution. People should feel strongly about an issue that is undertaken by the movement. Like, for example, you had that Save RA project that was launched. If the people had not supported the organizers of that movement, then that movement would have just fallen through. The government and no one else would have taken any notice about it. Another feature is that any movement has a particular objective or a problem on which it focuses. For example, a movement launched against corruption aims at ending corruption. Its objective is to end corruption. Any movement should have good leadership because a strong leader keeps the movement active and also effective. It is that leader who states what are the objectives and the aims of that movement. He forms the plan of action or the program of action. He decides on what kind of strategy of agitation has to be launched, whether to go on strikes, whether to hold protests, whether to have peaceful marches. These leaders decide these kind of programs. Also, any movement needs to have organization. That is, some people who feel strongly about that particular issue need to come together, and they are the ones who launch these movements. Without their effort, a movement cannot be launched, it cannot be organized. Like, for example, there are organizations and associations that work for the betterment of farmers. They launch farmers' movements and get people to participate in that movement. So, these were the characteristic features of any movement. Now, let's have a look at the important movements that are there launched in India. Ever since the pre independence era, you've had so many different movements that were launched from time to time to resolve so many different issues. Like, for example, you had the Swadeshi movement launched by Mahatma Gandhi in 1905, encouraging Indians to buy Swadeshi made goods and boycott foreign goods so that Indians could get more employment. You also had the Satyagraha movement that was launched in 1919. Similarly, there are so many other movements that have been launched uh, ever since India got independence, also. Let's have a look at some of these movements. Like you have tribal movements. Now, in the pre independence period, the British government deprived tribal people of their right to livelihood on forest resources because the British government rather used to convert certain sections of the forest for their personal use, for hunting specifically. And tribals were not allowed to be there in that forest. So there were so many different tribal uprisings that were organized at that time. Like you had the Kolams of Chota Nagpur, the Gonds of Orissa, the Kolis, the Bilas, the Ramoshis of Maharashtra, the Santals and Mundas from Bihar, who from time to time used to go against the Britishers and organize uprisings. These uprisings were nothing but tribal movements. This tribal struggle has continued over a period of time and even continue now. Tribals in India face several problems. The main problem and the main demand of the tribal movement is to accept the right of the tribals over forests and allow the tribals to collect forest products and cultivate on forest land. So these tribal movements aim at getting these issues resolved. Then you have farmers' movements. Farmers' movements in India is another very important movement because India is basically an agrarian country. Now, in the pre-British era or even in the British period, farmers started getting organized due to anti-agricultural policies of the British government. There were farmers' movements organized in the districts of Bardoli and Champaner to fight against the unjust policies of the Britishers. These farmers' movements were organized, to protest against the Britishers who would force the farmers to pay land revenue even when there were famines and droughts that the poor farmers experienced. Again, farmers' movements at that time were also organized when the Britishers would force farmers to grow cash crops and not grow food crops. So at that time, farmers used to organize movements against the Britishers and these kind of policies that they came up with. The farmers' movements at that time were inspired by the thoughts of social reformers like Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, Justice Ranade, Mahatma Gandhi. Due to some reforms in agriculture, the farmers' movement slowed down. Now, these reforms in agriculture, especially in the post independence era, were related to tenancy laws, that is, ownership of land, laws related to farming, laws related to land. There were a lot of revisions made by the government which allowed a lot of farmers who had mortgaged their land with landowners to now get back their land. So because of that, the farmers movement started slowing down because a lot of issues of the farmers started uh, being resolved. They were wiped out. But after the Green Revolution that was launched in the 1970s, the farmers movement once again became more active and effective. The reason for this is that although the Green Revolution aimed at increasing production of food and achieving self sufficiency in food grains and other crops, this Green Revolution did not benefit the poor farmer. The poor farmer was dissatisfied because he did not get the benefits of his farming. All the profits that were made by the sale or from the sale of all his food crops and other crops that he grew went on to the landowners who owned their land. So only the rich farmers benefited from this, while the poor farmers were exploited by people who owned their farmland. To resolve this, various farmers' movements were launched. Implementation of the recommendations of the Swaminathan Commission, appropriate price for agricultural products, agriculture to be treated as an industry, death relief or death cancellation also, having one national policy for agriculture. These were some of the demands of the farmers' movements. Some farmers' organizations are Shetkari Sanghatan, Bharatiya Kisan Union, All India Kisan Sabha. These are the important farmers' organizations in India that organize or launch farmers' movements from time to time to resolve problems faced by farmers. We come now to movements that have been launched by trade unions or workers. Now, the trade union movement in India has its background in the industrial revolution that took place in the latter half of the 19th century in India. Textile industries and railway companies were established in various parts of India in the latter half of the 19th century. Now, in 1899, in an unorganized manner, railway workers went on strike. They went on strike for their demands to remove inequality in the working conditions that were there between the British officers and the Indian officers who were working in this industry that belonged to the British government. However, the first organization for resolving the issue of workers was established in 1920. This organization was known as the All India Trade Union Congress or the AITUC. This organization later on went on to become a political party based on communist principles. In the post independence era, trade unions started working more effectively. In the 1960s and 70s, trade union movement organized several agitations for the benefit of workers and to make sure that workers got a lot of benefits from their employers. But from 1980s, the trade union movement started getting disintegrated because there was a lot of corruption and political practices that were going on in these trade unions. Globalization was another reason why the trade union movement was not that effective. In India, workers are facing different problems like unstable employment conditions, contract labor, financial insecurity, absence of legal protection for workers, unlimited working hours, insecurity at the workplace, especially for women, health hazards, especially in places or industries involving dangerous work. These are some of the problems, and there are some workers' unions that work or launch movements to protest against these problems that workers face. Then you have women's movement. In the pre-independence period, you had many social reformers in India who initiated various women's movement. Some of them were Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, Savitribai Phule, Maharishi Karve, Pandita Ramabai, Mahadev Govind Ranade or Justice Ranade, Mahatma Gandhi. These social reformers took the initiative in ending evil social practices like sati and child marriages. They also advocated reforms such as widow remarriage, women's education, and the right to vote for women. The women's movements at that time aimed at eliminating injustice against women and ending evil social practices against women and enabling women to lead a respectable life and participate actively in various aspects of social life. But after independence, the Constitution of India gave every kind of freedom and human right to everyone, both men and women. But in spite of this, women were not treated equally in several fields. During this period, that is after independence, the post independence era, women's movements aimed at freedom of movement, making sure that there was equality given to women and that women too were given all the human rights. In the latter period, women participated to a very great extent in all the various social movements that took place against corruption, caste discrimination, religious extremism, in these kind of evil social practices that were there going on. And when they participated against these evil practices, they became aware of injustices that were done to women on grounds of caste and religion, and also corrupt practices that were carried out on the basis of gender. Like one example would be unequal pay given to women for same work done by men and women. Earlier on, men had initiated women's movement against exploitation of women. But now, women started taking the initiative in organizing movements done to resolve injustices done to them. And not only that, they also started launching movements to remove social evils. In India, women's movement is not homogeneous in nature. That is, it does not deal with several issues at one time. Most of them, or most of these women's movement, deal with particular issues, a few particular issues like dowry, female infanticide. However, women's movements at various levels are also taking up issues like women's health, social security, financial independence, that would be right to property, empowerment of women, all these kind of issues. We move on to movements launched for uh, the betterment of the environment. Now, environmental degradation has become a very, very serious problem in today's age, both at the national and international level. At the international level, you have several movements that are being organized to stop the deterioration of the environment. And we can see a significant international cooperation, that is, cooperation between various countries who work together to stop environmental degradation. In India, many movements are working on different aspects of the environment. Some movements work on curbing pollution, while others work on conserving biodiversity and saving many species from extinction. The environment movements are taking up issues like protecting different sources of water, protection of forests, green belt, curbing pollution of rivers, curbing the use of harmful chemicals and their ill effects, etc. For example, you have Dr. Rajendran Sinha Rana, who is also known as the Waterman of India, who formed an organization named as Tarun Bharat Sangh. His social movement started a campaign for water conservation, revival of rivers, forest conservation, and wildlife conservation. You also have consumers movement launched, especially in the modern era, modern times. Now, the consumer movement emerged in India after the Consumer Protection Act came into existence in 1986. This movement has a very broad objective because it believes that each member of the society is a consumer because every human being is buying some or the other goods and services. Due to the changing nature of social and economic systems, the consumer is now facing different problems like adulteration of goods, increased cost of items for no reason at all, faulty weights and measures being used. The consumer movement works to protect consumers from such type of frauds. So what we have seen in this lesson is that in a democratic system, although political parties aim at bringing about social change and working for the benefit of people, people can also bring about this social change with the help of various movements that it organizes and launches. With this, I end this lesson. For your assignment, kindly do the questions that have been given to you. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.